Guys, welcome back to another episode of Weightlifting Academy. I am your host, Nick Horton, the Iron Samurai. My finger went in the wrong spot because the viewfinder's over there. But that makes it look cool. It's kind of fun. In this episode, we are going to take off of what we talked about in the last episode, which was whether or not the conventional powerlifting deadlift was, in fact, a very useful exercise for a weightlifter. And the second question, which was whether or not it was going to fuck you up if you did it regularly as a weightlifter. I promised you I was going to discuss the sumo deadlift today. So that's what I'm going to do. Everything I talked about last time was about the conventional deadlift, but I feel like the sumo deadlift is such a different animal that the answers change. So I said the conventional deadlift had very little use for a weightlifter. But you could do it, and it's not going to fuck you up. It's a pretty normal thing to pick things off the ground. It seems awfully silly that that's going to somehow destroy your ability to be a weightlifter. How about the sumo deadlift, though? If you've been following me for a while, reading my shit, you'll know that I actually often advise a competitive Olympic weightlifter, if they're going to deadlift regularly, to choose the sumo variation rather than the conventional. I prefer that. And I have a couple reasons for that, and I want to explain them real quick. The sumo deadlift, I think of as, it's a more athletic movement, and by that I mean it has higher carryover to more sports than a conventional deadlift. And it does so for a couple of reasons. I want to explain that. And this is just, I don't really have a lot of science to back this up. This is a hunch thing. But it's a hunch based on some solid work with enough people, and just even on myself. The bodybuilding world has, for a very long time, over a century, considered the conventional deadlift to be a back exercise. When they do their split routines and all that shit, they often throw the deadlift not on their leg day, but on their back day. And I think they're correct. This regular conventional deadlift is fundamentally a back exercise. You got to use your legs a lot to get it off the floor. But once you've done that, your back takes over a lot as a prime mover. That's remarkably different than the sumo deadlift. The sumo deadlift, especially done really what I would think of as correctly, which is really quite wide, is totally a leg exercise. I mean, it's mostly your adductors, your glutes, and your hammies working crazy overtime in order to get that bar off the floor. And you can see even just externally when you're watching people how it looks and correlate that with what I'm saying. The conventional deadlift, what happens in almost all of the big heavy deadlifts? What really happens? People break it off the floor, their back looks kind of okay, and somewhere in the middle it just goes bloop, totally roundy backy syndrome, and then it bloop at the top. When they get to the end, that sound rarely comes out of their mouths. But it's true, right? It becomes this exercise where your back has to just unfold at the top. That almost never happens to somebody on a sumo. Even people who aren't very good at sumo, their form's bad and everything, they still are much more able to maintain a strong, locked-in, rigid back. And a lot of the reason for that is because it's a little more like a squat than it is like a big, wide powerlifting squat than it is like a pull. And because of that, I think that it's the crisscrossing that can happen with a conventional deadlift and say you're clean isn't at all likely. It's not at all likely at all. You're not going to do that with a sumo. It's so different. I almost think of it as like the anti-snatch. Even in a fun visual way. Like the snatch, you have your hands wide and your legs fairly close. With the sumo deadlift, you have your legs wide and your hands fairly close. And it also is just like you go hard off the floor on a sumo. With a snatch, you go kind of slow off the floor and then fast off the hip and all this stuff. I mean, it really is in a lot of ways like an anti-snatch. And what I really mean by that is that it's so different, so remarkably different, that it's not going to screw with your Olympic lifting at all. I don't have this belief at all. I don't think it's going to screw with it in the slightest. The conventional deadlift, I don't think it's going to mess you up either. But I do understand at least some of that argument where if you spend a lot of time conventional deadlifting and not a lot of time doing cleans, you're going to accidentally default to your deadlift positioning rather than a proper clean positioning, and that's a problem. That actually is a problem. This is what most of the time people are complaining about when they're weightlifter coaches, about why they don't want the conventional deadlift in their programs very much. But, again, I don't think that's actually as big a deal as people make it out to be, but I can see the point. The nice thing about a sumo is that you don't have that at all. The sumo deadlift takes that completely out of the equation. It's completely different than every other exercise a weightlifter would do. And so there's just no crisscrossing at all neurologically. You don't have that fucked up, like, I'm trying to do this one groove motor pattern, but then there's this other groove motor pattern. It's like right next to each other. It's fucked up, right? You don't have this problem with the sumo. It's great. But what about whether or not the sumo deadlift would actually be beneficial? I think there's at least enough initial evidence that I feel like I've gotten from working with a number of powerlifters who sumo, who are quite athletic in that particular range of motion, or that particular movement, sorry, that it's at least enough to develop a hypothesis that's worth testing. That a sumo deadlift for, for us, the adult recreational Olympic weightlifters, may actually help you build some strength in some areas where you suck. Mainly, I mean, in your adductors, because your adductors are probably weak. The adductors are a very important part of the human body in terms of like what you need to do athletically. If you're running, sprinting, jumping, exploding, the adductors should be quite strong. And more often than not, they aren't. And it has been shown through a fairly substantial amount of research that among the exercises that works the adductors more than almost any other is a wide sumo deadlift. So it seems likely that if you find yourself as one of those athletes whose adductors are kind of weak relative to the rest of your quads, or your hamstrings or any other part of your body, your lower body, maybe you need to throw in some exercises that are adductor heavy. By the way, another exercise that works the adductors a lot, interestingly enough, is a Bulgarian split squat and high step-ups. Those work out pretty good, but the difference between those and a sumo deadlift is the load. Obviously, on a sumo deadlift, you're going to be able to lift a ton more weight, and this kind of goes along with why, I'll talk about this in the future, but why I vastly prefer the Romanian deadlift as your primary hamstring exercise over a lot of the other types of hamstring work that's out there. Not because those aren't good for activating the hamstrings, but because the total load on the RDL can be so freaking high. And if you're trying to be a strength athlete, you need to move big weights all the time. In other words, you got to get your load way up there. So I believe in doing these other things. I'm doing Bulgarian split squats every single day right now, by the way. Oddly named exercise because I don't think they originated in Bulgaria. But nonetheless, it makes it sound cooler if you say Bulgarian split squats, so I'm totally down with that. The sumo deadlift, however, in addition to being one of my very favorite exercises ever invented, I do believe has at least some value for athletes who are not powerlifters. That the sumo deadlift may in fact be one of those interesting exercises that we hadn't thought about before in the strength world, in the strength and conditioning world, but may have more value than we originally credited it with. We just haven't actually tested it. There is no solid research out there ever done on a sumo deadlift transfer to other strength sports, particularly Olympic-style weightlifting. We don't know. We really don't. So, who knows? I just have a very strong hypothesis that it's at least somewhat valuable. Now, let's not be stupid. I didn't say it replaces anything that I've already thrown out there as very important for an Olympic weightlifter. The squat is still, and probably always will be, the thing you've got to do if you're a weightlifter. You can only pick only one strength exercise to do in addition to your Olympic weightlifting. It's got to be that squat, the back squat specifically. You know that I've promoted front squatting quite a lot for a lot of people. However, for a dedicated competitive strength athlete, it's the back squat that I'm after. But in addition to that, and Romanian deadlifts, and snatch pulls, and clean pulls, and all of that other stuff that I love you doing, I don't see anything wrong with throwing on top of that some sumo deadlifting and seeing how that helps you. I will take a bet. I'd take the bet that it probably would do you some good. May not have a big impact on somebody who's already that national level, pretty damn good Olympic weightlifter. Maybe not them. But that's probably not you. Maybe you are really imbalanced in the lower body in ways you didn't take seriously. This is why, again, I think for non-already badass weightlifters, in addition to squatting, you have got to make sure you're doing things like Romanian deadlifts and other types of work. I like hip thrusts, for instance, that are really specific. They're heavy exercises, but they're also specific exercises for areas of your body you're probably not working well enough. And the adductors are huge. You've got to do that. You got to have big, strong adductors to be a great strength athlete, or really a great athlete in any sport. That has already been substantiated by a ton of both scientific research and a lot of just anecdotal stuff by coaches. Most coaches would agree with that. So there's lots of ways to do that, but I think it makes a lot of sense to use an exercise that is specific. And the sumo deadlift exercise is really specific in that way. It's one of the best possible ways to activate the adductors, and it has high load potential. So you can go heavier than fuck and really get them big and strong. So I'm going to leave it at that because I would like to just refer you basically to my buddy Chris Duffin, who is one of the greatest sumo deadlifters in the world right now. That's a fact. He is got one of the biggest sumo deadlifts ever recorded for his body weight. So... And he's one of those guys, if he didn't have he has a collection of injuries that kind of preclude his ability to be an Olympic weightlifter, but he's one of those few powerlifters I've ever seen who I honestly believe could be a great Olympic weightlifter if they ever decided to transition, because he's very athletic. A lot, there's a subset of powerlifters out there who really aren't very athletic outside of, they're like one-trick ponies. He's not like that at all. He's a very for real athlete in all the ways you want an athlete to be. And I really could see him being a great weightlifter if it was ever something he wanted to do, just, put a couple of years in to learn how to do that. Part of the reason I think that that's true is because he's very well-rounded. The balance thing is huge in his programming. He's not just a one-trick pony. He's got a lot of strength in a lot of different ways. And I think that's a very underrated part of what it takes to be a great strength athlete in any of the strength sports. You need to be far more balanced than is usually being pushed. And it doesn't always work out. I wrote an article a couple of years ago, and I got a lot of shit for it, about how, I basically said the back squat wasn't all that. That's kind of what I said. It's funny considering I'm the squat nemesis guy. So, I obviously love the back squat, and I want everybody to do it. But it's just not enough all by itself for most people. Most people need more. So back squat like a maniac, but throw in other stuff. Throw in the front squat for your quads. Throw in the Romanian deadlift for your hamstrings. Throw in hip thrusts for your butt, and then throw in sumo deadlifts for your adductors. I think that's really smart. And then throw in a lot of single leg work on top of it all. You have to go a little higher rep with that. Obviously, you can't go for the 1 rep maxes, but you can throw in a lot of work. More work, baby, more work. All right, I'll see you on the flip side. This is Nick Horton. Make sure you get your free shit over at weightliftingacademy.com. It's waiting for you. It's begging for you. It misses you. weightliftingacademy.com, and I will see you tomorrow with another episode of Weightlifting Academy. Guy Samurai out.